OCD is a fairly well-known but also a very misunderstood mental health condition. Often people who are exceptionally organised and tidy, or like to do things in a certain way, will say, "Oh, I'm a bit OCD." But that's simply not true. That kind of comment minimises how badly people with obsessive-compulsive disorder suffer from their illness. Repetitive and intrusive thoughts dominate the internal mental world of someone with OCD, causing constant and crippling anxiety. And the need to repeat the same behavioural compulsions again and again and again leaves little time for the rest of their lives. In this video, we'll discuss the biological approach to explaining and treating OCD. Of course, if you want to brush up on biological terminology, you can check out my biological psychology video in the approaches unit. But I will cover everything you need for this section, from areas of the brain to candidate genes and drug treatments, as well as evaluations right here. Psychboost.com, over 170 videos to help you with your qualification, and Patreon supporters can access bonus resources, tutorial videos, and the Discord channel. The biological approach to explaining and treating OCD. There are a wide range of explanations for why people develop OCD, but in this video we need to focus on the biological, including genetic and neural explanations. You'll likely remember what obsessive-compulsive disorder is from my characteristics video, but as a quick reminder, OCD is a common mental health condition affecting around 1 in 50 people. These individuals have obsessive thoughts and compulsive behaviours. The repetitive and unpleasant obsessive thoughts are mental images, worries and urges that cause anxiety. Compulsions are the behaviours that the individual feels they need to act out in order to relieve the discomfort caused by the obsessive thoughts. Unfortunately, this relief is only temporary, and the obsessive thoughts soon return. Obsessions around dirt and contagion are common, leading to repetitive cleaning. There are obsessions about burglary, leading to repetitive checking of locks. And there are obsessions about causing a fire, leading to repetitive checking of power switches. These are just some of the more common symptoms, but there are many, many other obsessions and compulsions. The biological approach to explaining OCD, the genetic explanation. The genetic explanation suggests that a vulnerability or predisposition to OCD is inherited from our parents. While there certainly isn't one single OCD gene that causes OCD, there are some individual genes, called candidate genes, that are found more frequently in those people who have OCD. These include gene 9, COMP gene, SERT gene, and 5-HT1D beta gene. However, in total, there are as many as 230 separate genes that could be involved in some way in the development of OCD. This means OCD is polygenetic. Family studies also indicate a genetic origin to OCD. The prevalence rate of OCD in the general population is 2%. However, if an individual has OCD, the likelihood that their first-degree relatives have OCD, known as the concordance rate, rises to 10%. This increased risk is arguably due to shared genetics, with first-degree relatives sharing 50% of their genes. Identical twins who share 100% of their genetic makeup, also known as monozygotic twins, have been shown to have a 68% concordance rate for OCD, while non-identical or dizygotic twins have a 31% concordance rate. The presence of genes isn't the whole story, because those genes have functions. The role of your genes is to code for aspects of your biology, and it's thought those candidate genes might influence the functioning of certain neural systems in your brain, especially the serotonin system. The biological approach to explaining OCD, the neural explanation. Neural explanations for OCD include both biochemical causes, this is an imbalance of neurotransmitters, chemicals that communicate information between neurons, and the large structures in the brain that are made of many neurons. Serotonin is the neurotransmitter most associated with OCD. Low levels of serotonin are thought to cause obsessive thoughts, and the low level of serotonin is likely due to it being removed too quickly from the synapse before it's been able to transmit signal. If you haven't studied neurons and synapses yet, that probably sounded like a pretty weird sentence. When it comes to the synapse and synaptic transmission, I'm going to tell you what you need to know for OCD in this video, but I did make an entire video on synapses you might want to watch. Serotonin and other neurotransmitters are chemical messengers. Presynaptic neurons release neurotransmitters, which are detected through receptors on the postsynaptic neuron. If the signal is strong enough, then the message is passed on, and the neurotransmitters detach from receptors and are taken back into the presynaptic neuron through a process called reuptake. It seems like this process happens too quickly in people with OCD, leading to reduced levels of serotonin in the synapse. The SERT gene mentioned in the previous section is the gene responsible for serotonin transport in the synapse. Looking at larger structures in the brain, the communication between a set of brain structures termed the worry circuit is overactive in people with OCD, leading to an inability to filter out small worries. The structures that form the worry circuit are the orbitofrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for rational decision-making, the basal ganglia system, in particular a part called the caudate nucleus, and the thalamus. In normal functioning, the basal ganglia filters out minor worries coming from the orbitofrontal cortex. But if this area is hyperactive, even small worries get to the thalamus, which is then passed back to the orbitofrontal cortex, forming a loop. This is the recurring obsessive thoughts. This abnormal brain activity is ultimately responsible for the repetitive motor functions, the compulsions. These are an attempt to break this loop. While carrying out the compulsion may give temporary relief, the hyperactive basal ganglia will soon resume the worry circuit. There is another brain area that's linked to OCD called the parahippocampal gyrus. It's an area of cortex on the underside of the brain, close to the hippocampus. It's responsible for regulating and processing unpleasant emotions, and has been seen to function abnormally in cases of OCD. The biological approach to explaining OCD: evaluations. The fact that there's a high concordance rate between close family members, shown by the data provided by Nastat, suggests that there's a genetic origin to OCD. Closer relations share more DNA and have a higher concordance rate. This is because if you share more DNA, you have a higher chance of sharing the parts of DNA that cause the OCD. Both monozygotic and dizygotic twins grow up sharing very similar environments like food, upbringing, and education, and life events like bereavement or parental divorce. But there's a significant difference in concordance rate, 68% in monozygotic and 31% in dizygotic, suggesting the additional shared DNA is what's responsible for the increased concordance. But as you can imagine, there are issues with assuming it's the DNA that results in the high concordance rates. Closer family members also share similar environments. And even when it comes to twins, who do have similar experiences, it could be argued that identical monozygotic twins are treated more similarly, on the basis that they look identical, compared to dizygotic, non-identical twins. Also, the concordance rate, even for identical twins, is at 68%, not 100%, the level we'd expect for a feature that was entirely genetically determined. So there's likely a role for the environment. This means that the diaphysis stress model might be a more valid explanation than biology alone. Individuals inherit a genetic vulnerability to OCD, a diaphysis. However, the disorder does not develop unless there's a stressor, an environmental factor such as a traumatic life experience. This is supported by research from Chroma, who showed 54% of 265 participants with OCD reported at least one traumatic life event, and those with traumatic life events reported increased severity of OCD symptoms. This demonstrates an environmental aspect to OCD. Many neuroimaging studies using PET scanners have shown hyperactivity in the orbitofrontal cortex and the caudate nucleus in people with OCD, both while scanning the brain at rest and when symptoms are stimulated. But there is a problem with this neural evidence. It's correlational. Research cannot be sure if the hyperactivity in these areas cause OCD or are just a consequence of having OCD. We can evaluate the biological explanation for OCD based on the effectiveness of drug treatments. A meta-analysis by Samaro demonstrates SSRIs are more effective than placebos, suggesting there's a biological aspect to OCD. However, despite altering levels of serotonin in the synapse within hours, these drugs take weeks to reduce symptoms, and 40 to 60% of patients show no or just partial symptom improvement. These findings suggest low levels of serotonin have a role to play in OCD, but are not the sole cause of OCD. The biological approach to treating OCD: drug therapy. The main type of drug used to control the symptoms of OCD is a group of antidepressant drugs known as SSRIs. One example is fluoxetine, also known as Prozac. I think these SSRIs are well named because the name explains exactly what this class of drugs do in the brain. They are selective serotonin, meaning they only influence serotonin in the brain, reuptake inhibitors, meaning they slow down the process of reuptake in the synapse. This means that serotonin continues to stimulate the postsynaptic neuron. This decreases anxiety by normalizing the activity of the worry circuit. Going back to this image, we can see the process of reuptake. SSRIs, by blocking the reuptake of serotonin, keep serotonin in the synapse for longer, increasing its effectiveness. It can take 3 to 4 months for SSRIs to impact symptoms. However, for some patients, SSRIs are not effective. The dosage can be increased, but there are other treatment options. Anti-anxiety drugs like benzodiazepines enhance the neurotransmitter called GABA, slowing the central nervous system, resulting in general relaxation. Tricyclics and SNRIs work by increasing serotonin and noradrenaline. These drugs can be effective when SSRIs fail, but because they work on multiple neurotransmitters, they tend to have more intense side effects. Evaluations of biological treatments for OCD. As I've already mentioned, there is research evidence by Samara that compared SSRIs to placebos. Placebos are sugar pills that make the patient think they're receiving drug therapy. Samara combined the data from 17 studies, including 3,097 participants, into a meta-analysis. The results showed that SSRIs significantly reduce the symptoms of OCD compared to placebos between 6 and 17 weeks post-treatment. This suggests drug therapy is effective, at least in the short term. There are criticisms that this type of research may not be as reliable as it appears. Goldacre points out that the vast majority of the research studies on drug therapies are conducted by the pharmaceutical companies who created them. This means they have a financial interest in showing they're effective. This, along with a file draw problem, the fact that many negative results stay unpublished, means that the drug therapies may not be as effective as drug companies claim they are. On a related point, Dr. Ben Goldacre has 2 books, Bad Science and Bad Pharma. They're interesting and well written. Any student considering medicine or just interested in how science is conducted poorly and misrepresented in the media should probably read them. An advantage of drug therapy is it's a relatively inexpensive treatment, as well as potentially more convenient for the patient. This is in comparison to psychological therapies like CBT, which require multiple sessions with a trained therapist. As CBT is much more expensive, from an economic perspective, health services like the NHS are more likely to provide drug therapy before CBT. A disadvantage of drug therapy is it's not the preferred treatment plan for many patients, with many preferring a course of cognitive behavioral therapy. This is because drug therapy can have a range of potential side effects. In the Samara meta-analysis, nausea, headache, and insomnia were the most common side effects for each drug tested. There are other reasons drug therapy is not preferred by patients. The desired effects of the drugs, the symptom reduction, can take up to 3 to 4 months, and patients can ultimately become dependent on the drugs. And finally, drug therapies may be only treating the symptoms of OCD, not the cause. Serotonin imbalance could be due to other biological processes, or the origin of OCD may not be biological at all, but due to a traumatic experience. Remember, research by Cromer showed 54% of 256 participants with OCD reported at least one traumatic life event, and those with a traumatic life event reported increased severity of OCD symptoms. This suggests drug therapy may only be a temporary solution, and psychological therapy might be a more effective long-term treatment. I want to thank everyone over on Patreon for supporting the channel. Because of you, I've been able to teach part-time, meaning I can make PsychBoost on YouTube for everyone. And a special thank you to Kat Posnick and Ahmed Romani for supporting at the developer level. I do have extra resources that are exclusive to my patrons, so if you decide to sign up, you can grab those over my website. And these include over 100 exam question tutorial videos, of course including questions on the psychopathology unit. I hope this was helpful, and I will see you in the next PsychBoost video.